Everybody, welcome to the video. So I'm breaking down the Geico 500 at Talladega Superspeedway on Sunday, April 25th at around 2 p.m. Eastern. And if you guys have been around the channel for quite some time, you already know. You already know I'm super excited for this race on Sunday because I love short track racing, I love super speedways, and we got ourselves a plate race on Sunday at Talladega, and it's one of the best tracks in the entire series. We're going to have bumper-to-bumper racing, drafting impacts, 2-3 wide. We're going to have wrecks, cautions, lead changes, pretty much everything you can think of. So I'm super excited for this race. I'm sure you guys are as well. And super speedways are a really fun week to play DFS because it's all about strategy and roster construction. So I feel like it's always it's a track type that I typically have an edge at because a lot of people, which people are getting smarter these days, but a lot of people don't know how to build lineups optimally for super speedway races, and I feel like I do. So hopefully I'll be of some value to you guys this weekend. But if you do find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like. My NASCAR DFS community does an excellent job of interacting with my content, leaving likes, leaving comments, and the more you guys do that, the more it pushes my video out to more eyeballs in the YouTube world, so I really do appreciate that. And if you're new to the channel or you just haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. Around 50% of the people watching these videos have not yet subscribed, so if you haven't done that, please do that and hit that notification bell as well so you don't miss out whenever I post new content. If you don't follow me over on social media, I'm at Pennell16 on Twitter, getting close to 2K followers over there. And you can follow me on Instagram as well. I don't really post fantasy stuff on my Instagram, but if you want to see some Call of Duty stuff, MLB The Show, video games, when I get a haircut or what I eat with my girlfriend, you can follow me over on IG. And if you want to help support the channel over on Patreon and join the community of several hundred NASCAR DFS members, link is down below for that. And I just got to say, the community that we have built is absolutely awesome. All you guys rock. There's no harassment, no one being mean to each other. It's just a good fun time in there. And a lot of the time we're not even talking DFS. It's just having a good time in there. Lots of jokesters, but we can get serious, talk NASCAR DFS, and you know, it's a great community. If you guys enjoy the live streams on Sundays, it's kind of just an extended version of that in the Discord chat each and every single day at any given point of the day. People up there in 3, 4 in the morning talking. So if you guys want to join the community and you don't even want the extra content, there's just a Discord only option for that. But if you do want the content, I put a lot of time into that each and every single week. I write an article every week going over my favorite cash and GBP plays and breaking down roster construction, strategy, and previous optimal lineups and things like that. And I have the optimizer, which has been brand new the past couple weeks, which has been doing pretty well. We've had multiple people take down tournaments. Just like last week, we had 2 guys tie for first in the 100K tournament. We also had a guy take down the lug nut as well using the new logo, which was pretty cool. But you get access to the entire spreadsheet, the projections, ownership projections, power rankings, which is just an algorithm-based thing, green flag speed cheat sheets, previous optimal lineup data, pretty much everything you can think of, it is on my spreadsheet. So if you're interested to join the community, link is down below. I do appreciate each and every single one of you guys. But I think that's it for the shameless plug, so without further ado, let's dive into the preview of this week's race. And as per usual, I gotta do a couple housekeeping things before we get into the actual preview of this race. Number one, the live stream this weekend. I'm thinking on Sunday at around 12 p.m. Eastern. I'd like it to be at 1, but I don't like the whole hour before locked in because I like to have that time to kind of just chill in the Discord chat, have some lunch, think about my lineups, make sure nothing changes where I had to change all my lineups. So I don't really want to be bound to the computer on the live stream during times where things could change and things like that. So I'm thinking 12 p.m. is probably a good time for that. And then if you want to join the DraftKings contest, all you gotta do is comment your DK username down below. Say something nice with it. I don't really care. But the first 100 people that comment their DK username and accept the invite that I send you can join the contest, which is always a fun thing to do every single week. If you're new to the channel, have no idea what that is, I run a weekly DraftKings contest where 100 people join, top 3 win money, and you get a shout out on the channel. So it's just a fun way for me to interact with you guys. I have yet to make the podium. I want to make the podium. Hopefully it is this week, but people compete every single week, and it's always pretty fun. But I do want to shout out the winners that we had last week, so I'll throw it on the screen right about now. And taking home the gold medal was Chedios, coming in first place, taking home around $100. But he took home a lot more money than that this weekend because he actually tied for first. He had the same exact lineup, tied for first in the 100K contest, and took home a good chunk of money. So shout out to Chedios. It was really nice to see someone in the community take that down. We had other people take it down as well, which was pretty cool. Someone else in the YouTube comments let me know that. But shout out to Chedios for taking home the gold and, more importantly, taking home that big contest prize last weekend. Then Myers2305, who's been a long-time member in the Discord. Shout out to you getting in second place. JPool88 coming in third. And then right in the bubble, we had Mengel02, C Davis07, bunch of numbers. UK Cats 1, Alex Borman 18, and then the list goes on from the top 10. Not sure if you guys can see it on the screen right now because I still have to put the picture on there, but shout out to the guys who made the podium and then just bubbled on the outside. You were very close, but congrats to everybody. Good last week. It seemed like it was a pretty strong week overall besides Kyle Larson, but we'll we'll just forget that happened. But anyway, I think that's kind of it for the housekeeping. So let's get into the actual preview of this race. And as previously mentioned, this is the Geico 500 at Talladega Superspeedway. There's your outline of the track. It is rather large. It's a restrictor plate track, which means pretty much the field's going to be all bunched up together, driving in a tight pack. And that's what leads to these wreck fests, and that's why we theoretically say stack the back at these types of tracks. Now you don't have to full on stack the back. You can still roster guys starting inside the top 10, top 20. We'll go over that in a little bit. But for the most part, the stack the back slang that you're going to hear, which I feel like, I don't know if I started that. I feel like I've been saying that for a couple years on YouTube here, but we typically stack the back of these tracks because it minimizes the downside that your lineup's going to have, because pretty much anybody and everybody can wreck at a track like this, and typically the guys that are wrecking the entire field are the ones being aggressive near the front trying to win the race. So that's going to be guys like Joey Logano, Brett Keselowski. Like, these guys are phenomenal super speedway drivers, and they're probably going to be running well the entire race, but once they wreck, they can, like Joey Logano is starting second in this race. He could theoretically finish with negative 30-some points. He'd probably be one of the favorites to finish with negative points in that race, even though he is a phenomenal super speedway driver. He projects well for me, but if he happens to wreck, he's going to definitely get killed in points by a guy like, let's say, Timmy Hill or a Josh Bilicki or something like that, as long as they survive the wrecks. And those guys in the back, they know they're not going to win the race. They're just kind of hanging back trying to get top 20 finishes, and that's something they all do pretty well here, because guys like Bowman, Byron, Harvick, those are the kind of guys that get caught up in the wrecks, which does make them very, very risky plays starting near the front, because when they're all in, tight packs, one wrong move or one aggressive block gone wrong can wreck out half the field, and typically the guys wrecking out are the better drivers. So guys like Corey LaJoie, that's why Corey LaJoie is averaging some of the most DraftKings points per race at these types of tracks, is he just hangs around in the back, and then once the big wreck happens, he moves up and secures that top 20 finish. So that's kind of like the theory behind super speedway races and how we should build lineups. Also, we only have 180 laps available, which means there's only 131 dominator points available. So, like, dominator points really don't matter. And the thing here is that fast laps are completely spread out. Like, usually the guy up front's going to, like, let's say Denny Hamlin leads 50 laps. Usually he's getting the majority of fast laps at a different track. Here, they are completely spread out. And if anyone tells you they can project fast laps here, they are lying to you. It's not possible. So I completely take them out of my projections this week. So I don't put anything into fast laps, just laps led. We can typically figure out who's going to lead the most laps here, or maybe not the most laps, but who the typical lap leaders are. So I'll go over that when we do the driver by driver breakdown. But typically how I build my lineups here at super speedways, I usually do rules in my optimizer. It's going to be like 0 to 3 drivers starting inside the top 12, 0 to 3 drivers starting in the top 20, then 3 to 6 drivers starting 20 so and back. I mean, that can change week to week depending on who is where and what's going on. But that's kind of like a rule of thumb I like to follow. But I'll get into that in the article and then the optimizer settings and things like that, which I do. And I usually do a tutorial video on the optimizer on how I'm going to set it up that week. But I kind of think that's it for the preview. But if you guys don't believe any of the words I'm saying and you think I'm stupid and you're going to stack the front, I can show you the numbers that back this up. I typically have this just on the special part of the spreadsheet here, but I will show you so you guys know I'm not just making stuff up. Like, the numbers tell you should target drivers starting further in the back. So let's looking at previous optimal lineups here at Talladega for the past 3 years. So we'll pull up the previous optimal lineups here. So let's just look at the starting positions. So last year's optimal lineup, the most recent race we've had at Talladega, guys starting 21st, 16th, 30th, 28th, 35th, and 32nd. The race before that, 12th, 20th, 33rd, 18th, 15th, 21st. Race before that, 40th, 9th, 13th, 22nd, 34th, 33rd. Race before that, 8th, 11th, 24th, 30th. You guys see a pattern here. It's mostly guys starting in the back. Yes, there's a few guys starting inside that top 15 that tend to make the optimal lineup, so that's why in tournaments, we want to target those guys, because typically we're going to want the race winner. Now, not all the time, because we've had instances where the guy starting on the pole ends up winning the race. I believe that happened with Stenhouse. I forget if it was either Talladega or Daytona, but he started on the pole, won the race, and he still was not in the optimal lineup. So, again, place differential is king here. We have to target place differential, and guys that are starting closer to the front, I'm not going to full fade them, but if you're playing cash games, you don't want to play these guys up front because they carry insane risk. Like, let's just look at the heat map really quick. And I know I keep rambling here before getting to the driver by driver breakdown, but this is some pretty important stuff this week. And it's probably more important than just talking about these drivers individually because, I mean, yeah, we can talk about drivers and some are better than the others, but it's mainly about where these guys are starting this week. So let's just say Denny Hamlin in the pool, he's the best driver at super speedways, but let's just say he gets caught up in a wreck. And he could easily get caught up in a wreck, get turned, finish 36. He'd get negative 30 points. But let's say worst case scenario, Harrison Burton, who's probably going to be decently popular this week, starting in 39th. Let's say he's the first guy to wreck out, and he finishes in 40th place. He'd still get 0 points, and if Hamlin happened to finish 36, he's getting negative 30, so he's still outscoring him by around 30 points. So these are the kind of tracks where It's the guys in the back carry the highest floors and the highest ceilings as well. And one other thing I should mention is that salary means absolutely nothing here. You can leave as much money on the table that you want. It's usually a good idea to leave money on the table because if you're trying to even out your lineup, you're probably not making the best super speedway lineup possible. And people will do that because people do not like leaving salary on the table, even though the number that you should leave money on the table. Because if we go back to that previous optimal lineup tab that I was talking about, look at the average salary used: $41,000, $45,000, $43,000, $45,000, $47,000, which is actually quite a bit, and $47,000 once again. So typically you don't use the majority of your salary. And I know Daytona is a lot different than Talladega, but I remember one year at Daytona, I think there was only $31,000 salary used. So don't be afraid to leave some money on the table and target some drivers you wouldn't normally roster. And your lineup should look funky this week. If you look at your lineup and you like it, you probably didn't build a very good super speedway lineup. If you look at it and think it's terrible, that's probably a pretty good lineup for super speedways. But I think that's going to be it for the rambling here. So let's just get into the driver by driver breakdown portion of this video. All right, just my overall thoughts on the pricing, which I typically go over every single week. Doesn't really matter this week, so I don't have any thoughts. You can build whatever lineup you want. Don't really factor in pricing whatsoever, because if you're stacking up these guys in the 10K range, you're probably doing it wrong anyway. But we'll start up top in the 10K range with Brad Keselowski, $10,500. He is starting in 10th, and he's one of those guys that you can kind of mix and match for tournaments because he has race winning upside. The only problem is Keselowski has went from one of the best super speedway racers, one of the best plate racers, to now one of the worst. I feel like he wrecks out almost every single time, and his numbers at Talladega would represent that thought because he's got an average finish of 22.5 despite one of the best average running positions in the field at 10.2. I actually believe it's the third best, right behind teammates Ryan Blaney and Joey Logano. And the Penske cars typically run up front at Talladega. If I sort this by average running position, I believe the three Penske cars would be top three. Yeah, Joey Logano, Ryan Blaney, and Brad Keselowski. I would not be surprised if they work their way to the front and then just kind of train it, make a Penske train 1 through 3 and dominate the lower or higher line, whatever one they prefer. But yeah, these guys should be up front contending for the win. I'd imagine they're gonna, pick up the laps led for the most part. Now, my favorite out of these guys is probably gonna end up being Ryan Blaney once you factor in the starting position and how they ran at Talladega. But Keselowski's a wild card here because he should run well and be there. It's just he wrecks almost every single time. Look at the recent finishes for Talladega: 0 wins, 0 top 5, 0 top 10s, only 1 top 15, only in the top 20 half the time, and he's only averaging 13 DraftKings points per race here, averaging negative 14 place differential spots. And his recent finishes at Talladega, sorry about that, 18th, 19th, 25th, 13th, 27th, and 33rd. And if we expand this to the past 10 races at these track types, good running position, but again, average finish of 21.2 with 0 top 5s, 1 top 10, and only 4 top 15. So while I think Keselowski is a decent play here starting in 10th, he can only be reserved for tournaments because he is starting pretty far up, and I hate his history at these super speedways recently because he's just been trash at them in terms of getting good finishes. And then Chase Elliott, $10,300. He's starting in 8th. Very similar play to Keselowski, and really the top three guys are very similar plays. Blaney, Elliott, Keselowski, they can all be grouped in as guys that are starting in the top 10 that have race winning upside. But Chase Elliott has won here recently. He has 2 top 5s, 3 top 10s. Pretty good at super speedways. One of the typical lap leader as well. 17.8 laps led per race, which is, I believe that's top 5. The usual lap leaders are guys like Denny Hamlin here, Joey Logano, Keselowski, Elliott, Blaney, those kind of guys. Kurt Busch also has a decent amount of laps led as well, but he's not typically someone I think of too much as being a dominator at these track types, but dominator points don't really mean much anyway. But if they can grab a good finish and get a decent chunk of laps led, it can kind of add up at the end. But anyway, Chase Elliott, he's fine at super speedways starting 8th. He's just one of those guys you're going to mix and match up top. Would not go there in cash games though. Ryan Blaney, $10,100. He's starting in 7th. I was off Blaney last week because it's a terrible track for him at Richmond, but I am back aboard the Blaney train because Talladega is an excellent track for him, and the Penske cars typically run very, very well here. He was a back-to-back winner in the 2019 fall race and the 2020 spring race, and I believe it was Stenhouse who was like super close to beating him in that spring race because the ending was pretty wild, but the overall race wasn't that great, but the ending was pretty good. But yeah, Blaney, he's tip contender here at Talladega, and I would imagine that's not going to change here. He's going to be fine outside of a wreck for the most part. I'd expect him to run near the front, be one of the best lap leaders here, and contend for a top 5 finish, if not win the race, because I typically like playing Blaney a lot at these super speed races. So I'm a big fan of Blaney in tournaments, and I don't think that surprises anybody, but I am back on the Blaney train this weekend after taking a week off. Then Denny Hamlin at $10,000 starting in the pole. This is probably the biggest headache here in DFS because I don't play pole setters at super speedways. I don't really care who they are. I just don't do it. The problem is Denny Hamlin has been so good at these track types. It's really hard to want to full fade him. I'll be underweight on the field because, again, pole sitter, it's Denny Hamlin, and everyone's going to look at the history here, and they're going to play him, and I feel like he's going to be overowned. And my heart tells me, play Hamlin, he's going to keep doing this well, but my head's telling me, no, that's not smart. Follow the numbers because you typically do pretty well here, so I'm going to plan on being underweight to the field on Denny Hamlin, and I feel like we could honestly see him getting, I'm not sure, I still have to run my ownership projections, but I would not be surprised if he touched around 20%, if not more. I mean, it depends on who touts him up, but pole sitters at super speedways tend to suck, but Denny Hamlin's just in such a weird spot because he's so good at them. Looking at his recent numbers at Talladega, out of the past 6 races, he's finished in the top 5 4 of those times. He won one. Looking at his recent finishes here, he won the last race at Talladega, then 4th, 3rd, had that wreck 36th, then 4th and 14th. Looking at the past 10 races of these track types, he's finished into the top 5 8 of those 10 times, averaging the most DraftKings points per race, not even close. Average finish of 8.4, the most laps led. Again, fast laps don't really matter. And looking at super speedways in the 2020 and 2021 season, which would only include the Daytona 500 this season, averaging again the most DraftKings points by far of 65.7, an insane average finish of 2.8, the best drive rating, 2 wins, 5 top 5. So he's been in the top 5 each and every single time, and 46 laps led per race. So I want to say fade him, but he's also just so good here. I know a lot of this is luck-based at super speedways, but Denny Hamlin's one of those guys that he just knows how to run these races well. I'd imagine he's going to stay up front, and I wouldn't be surprised if he could lead like 50 so laps in this race, maybe even approach 100 if he just sticks out front, nothing bad happens to him, doesn't get caught up in the middle or doesn't get turned. I mean, there's a very good chance he could come out here, lead 100 laps and win this race. And if he does that, I would say he's probably going to be optimal. It's just very, very risky because if he wrecks and he's like 30% owned this week and he wrecks and you're way into the field, you're going to have massive leverage. And oh, it's such a difficult decision this week. I'm going to have to make a final decision later on when I write my article and things like that. But man, Hamlin is in such a tough spot this weekend because he's the best super speedway driver, but he's on the pole, and you don't want to play pole sitters at super speedways. And the same can be said for Joey Logano. I would say he's the second best super speedway driver, very good at Talladega specifically. The only problem is he's on the front row with Denny Hamlin, so it kind of sucks. The 2 best guys at super speedways are starting on the front row, which we typically avoid like the plague at super speedways. If they're like around the 8th to 12th, yeah, I'd be all about them in tournaments. It's just really hard to trust these guys. I'm not going to full fade them because they could easily win the race. So, and I believe Hamlin's pretty heavy favorite in Vegas to win this race. I think he's like at 650, so that's pretty good for a super speedway. So, I mean, I'm not going to full fade these guys, but I'm probably going to end up being underweight and just hope they get caught up on the wreck, which can easily happen. They're not, just because they're out front doesn't mean they can't get wrecked. They'll end up getting turned because the guy wants to win the race. So that's things you have to be careful about. But very good at Dega. 7.2 running position, which is the best in the field. The best drive rating, has a win, 3 top 5s, the most laps led. Looking at the recent finishes for Joey Logano at Talladega. And that's why these guys aren't locks. Like, he's good here, yes, but finishes of 26th, 17th, 11th, 4th, 5th, 1st. If he doesn't win this race and dominate a good portion of it, he's not going to be optimal. So you need these guys to win. Watching these guys, like, yes, they get good finishes, but they have to win really to be optimal. So that's the only bad thing with these guys. But yes, Joey Logano, I don't have to really go over the numbers. He's good at super speedways, but you have to be very, very, very careful because he's starting so far up in the field. Kevin Harvick, $9,600. He is starting 16th, and while he's not that great at super speedways, I could see maybe wanting to play some Kevin Harvick starting in 16th. He did finish 10th here in last year's spring race, although I think that took place in June because obviously the season got suspended for a decent portion, but he's not a great super speedway driver, but I could see him kind of sneaking in that top 10. Plus, as bad as the Stewart-Haas cars have been this season, he's going to really need just a good finish today just to rack up some points because they are really struggling. But, I mean, he's shown top 5 upside in the past. He did finish 4th here in the 2018 spring race, but typically not a guy I target at these track types. So he's going to be one of those guys I'm kind of mixing and matching up top just to make it a little different because these guys are all starting really far up where I'm not going to have any serious ownership on them. But well, maybe besides Blaney in tournaments, if I take a stand there. But there's a guy, kind of guys you just mix and match for the most part because they have race winning upside, but they have a lot of downside as well, so you don't want to be super heavy on them. Kyle Larson, $9,400, starting in 12th. The Hendrick cars tend to run up front at these track types, but I also feel like they're magnets for getting wrecked for some reason because I'll always see Bowman and Byron. I feel like almost every single race, Bowman or Byron gets wrecked at a super speedway. I know that's not true. It's just in my head, every single wreck I can remember, it's either like a Bowman or a Byron starting in the front row and they get wrecked because I never play those guys and it tends to work out. Although I know Byron won. He won the last year's Daytona summer race, or the fall race, I believe. Playoffs started, I should say. But anyway, Kyle Larson starting 12th. Again, he's just one of those guys where he's a very similar play to Blaney, Elliott, Keselowski, where he's starting in that top 12, but he could be a race-winning guy. But that's really the extent to it. You can't go too deep into it because it's not like guys that show speed in the past at these tracks are just makes them good plays. It's all about avoiding wrecks and where these guys are starting, and the equipment doesn't really matter too much. Is a guy like, like a Timmy Hill going to come out and win? No, probably not. But you're not expecting that starting in 40th. You just need a good place differential upside. These guys starting up front, they need to be a race-winning guy or finish inside that top 2 or 3 or top 5, depending on where they're starting, to make it work. Same goes for Kyle Busch. Like, I'm not going to go too in-depth here. Kyle Busch usually wrecks at these tracks, but he tends to run well, but the finishes aren't there for him. I mean, looking at the recent finishes here, 27th, 32nd, 19th, 10th, 26th, and 13th, with an average finish of 21.1 the past 10 races at these track types, so you got to be careful with Kyle Busch. And Alex Bowman, a guy that's probably going to run well, but starting 5th, it's a little too high for me to have any interest. I might sprinkle him in. Like, I'll have exposure to probably every single driver in the field, but obviously I got to take some stance somewhere. And these guys starting in the top 5, it's just hard to play them with much confidence because they can easily get caught in the wreck and just absolutely sink your lineups. But there's also some upside to win the race here from Bowman. He's looked fantastic this year. Not that it really translates to this race, but one of those guys that you're going to have him win the race starting up in 5th. Dropping down to this 8K range, Martin Truex Jr., $8,900. If there's one guy I would say to full fade, Truex is probably my most confident fade on the entire slate because he sucks at these track types. He's only averaging 8.5 DraftKings points per race, average finish of 23.7. It's not like he's getting unlucky where he's running well and he just wrecks out. He doesn't run well either. He's got an average running position of 21.9, drive rating of 65.8. No wins, no top 5s, no top 10s, not even a top 15, and only one top 20. If you want to look at the specific finishes for Mr. Truex here, 23rd, 23rd, 26th, 20th, 23rd, and 26th. If there's one guy you want absolutely none of, I mean, Truex is pretty much the top of that list for me, so I hate to say a faded guy and watch him win now because I said this, but he's a candidate for me to have 0 in my lineups. Maybe I'll have 1 or 2 just in case. You never know. But, I mean, if you're playing single entry, absolutely not. Absolutely not. No Truex for me, even though he's been awesome this year. Eric Almirola, $8,700. He's starting in 14th, and he's one of the best drivers in the entire field at Talladega. He's got one of the best average finishes of 10.2, good driver rating, has a win, 3 top 5s, 5 top 10s, and before he wrecked out of last year's race in the fall race, I'm pretty sure he was in like 4 of the 5 past 6 optimal lineups at Talladega. That's just how good he is here. And besides that last race, which is really going to skew his numbers, he's finished 3rd, 4th, 9th, 1st, and 7th. So if he doesn't wreck, he's probably going to finish inside the top 10. And starting 14th puts him in excellent tournament play territory because he's not starting super up front where he's super risky, but he's not in the back either where he's a super safe play. So Almirola, I'm liking him a lot in tournaments. This is a very, very good track for him. And don't be alarmed when you look at your lineups throughout the race because nothing's going to matter until the last lap. Like I remember last year when he finished 3rd, which I believe was the year he finished backwards, finishing 3rd, he hung out in the back the entire race, and people were tweeting at me like, Almirola sucks today. I'm like, no, he's just hanging in the back trying to avoid the wrecks. Like, you can easily gain 20 spots in a lap at Talladega. Don't be alarmed if you guys are sucking. They're probably just hanging out in the back and waiting for the big one. Like, looking at your lineups during a super speedway is, it's kind of just torture because it means nothing. You can be winning $1 million and then losing $1 million, and then at the very end of the race, your change is 500 times. So don't be alarmed. Just it's fun to watch the money when during the race, but don't put too much into it. Don't get too sad. Don't get too happy either. Just stay neutral and wait till turn 4 of the last lap, and then you'll know how things are gonna go. Then Ricky Stenhouse Jr., $8,500. He's starting in 17th, and like Almirola, if he doesn't wreck at this track, it's a very good one for him. And it's kind of weird because Stenhouse in the past has always been known as the guy that wrecks every single race. This season, that's not been the case. He hasn't wrecked yet. I don't think he's finished outside the top 20 either, so he's having an excellent season. But at super speedways, typically, Stenhouse is awesome. Like, he's usually competing for wins. He's got an average finish of 13.7, typically a lap leader at these track types, as well as 3 top 5 finishes the past 6 races. So 50% of the time, he's been inside the top 5, 4 top 10s, and looking at his actual finishes here at Dega, did wreck in last year's race with Almirola, but finished 2nd, 9th, 25th, 3rd, and 5th. So Stenhouse, very similar play to Almirola in my opinion, and an excellent tournament target. Don't think I'd get there in cash games because he's starting 17th, and Stenhouse can always be a bit of a wild guy, and he's going to be pretty aggressive in this race, but I still like him a lot in tournaments. Kurt Busch, $8,300, starting in 15th. I feel like from Almirola to MDB, these guys are almost all the same plays because they're decent at super speedways. Now, MDB seems to crash every single time, but he runs well at these track types. It's just he crashes every single time, but they're all starting pretty much next to each other for the most part, and they have top 5 upside, so I'm definitely going to have interest in all of them, especially in tournaments. But Kurt Busch, Talladega is typically a good track for him. He's actually one of the best lap leaders here the past 6 races. He has had some bad finishes due to wrecks, but it's nothing you can really control. But when he doesn't wreck, he's got some good finishes like 9th, 6th, 14th, and 2nd. So I do think he's a decent tournament play. MDB crashes every single year, I feel like. 19th, 30th, 31st, 30th, 26th, and 21st for the finishes. But he's in a Penske car, and they tend to run up front. And I would not be surprised if he can join their train and have a good running position. It's just, I don't know what it is, but he's a magnet for the wrecks. But I do think he's a decent tournament flyer. Starting 13th makes him, it's risky for sure for a guy that wrecks a lot, but I do think he's viable. William Byron, $8,000, starting 4th. Pretty much the same exact play to Alex Bowman, in my opinion. So whatever I said for Bowman, you can apply here for Byron. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it doesn't matter what car these guys are in or anything. It just, where are they starting and how they performed at Super Speedways in the past is pretty much all you can do. But even then, there's a lot of luck factor just getting caught up in a wrecks, because a lot of times it's not their fault, but if someone wrecks up front, it's just a chain reaction, and then you hit someone that you weren't even really a part of for the most part. So a lot of luck, but there's a way you can set your lineups up optimally to be successful with these track types. But anyway, dropping down to Harrison Burton here at $7,900, starting all the way back in 39, so we can only lose you one spot. I kind of already went over that earlier on the heat map, but he's got a super safe floor. I know he's in the 96 car, which was the lawnmower last year for Daniel Suarez, but at a super speedway track, it doesn't really matter. I even remember, I think we saw Daniel Suarez leading a pack of cars for several laps at Daytona. Or was that this year? I forget. It might have been this year for the Daytona race, but I think it might have been last year. But either way, I mean, he's fine. He's got a super safe floor. The ceiling's probably limited, but if you are looking for a safe floor in cash games, I don't mind Burton. If there's a big one and he avoids it, he can gain you around 20 spots, which is excellent. He has a chance to be optimal. So Harrison Burton, I think he's a fine play in that regard. Austin Dillon, $7,700, starting at 11th. Pretty good at super speedways. Prefer him at Daytona, though. He's just one of those guys where you're going to have minimal exposure, and if he gets a top 5, there's a chance he's optimal, but it's going to be a very hard path for him to be optimal, considering all the other place differential plays that we have. Ryan Newman, $7,600, starting back in 28th. He's one of my favorite plays as of right now. He grades out very well at projections because he's just one of those guys that knows how to stay alive until the end of the race and pick up a good finish. This is a very good track for him. Average finish of 11.8, averaging 42.3 DraftKings points per race. Past 6 races, he has 2 top 5s, 4 top 10s. Again, laps, sudden fast laps don't really matter too much for me with these place differential guys, but looking at the actual finishes, he's finished 6th, 24th, 2nd, 7th, 25th, and 9th. Good enough for me. Like Ryan Newman quite a bit, starting all the way back in 28th. You can target him in cash games. Eric Jones, $7,500, starting in 22nd. Pretty good at the super speedways, and I'm really hoping his downgraded car to the 43 car keeps people off him this week, because again, like I said, equipment does not matter, and the 43 car with Bubba Wallace was actually pretty good at the super speedway tracks, and Eric Jones is good at Talladega and Daytona. He's a winner at these track types. He won, I believe it was a summer race at Daytona, and looking at his numbers at Talladega, pretty good. He has 2 top 5 finishes, 3 top 10s, and looking at his recent finishes, last year he finished in the top 5 both times, finishes of 2nd and 5th. Had a wreck in 2019, then 19th, 8th, and another wreck in 2018. But he's pretty good at super speedways, and if people are going to overlook him because of the 43 car move, I want to be all about Jones here, so I'm liking him a lot in tournaments. Christopher Bell, $7,400, starting in 6th. He's just one of those guys where can you really trust it? And he's just starting so far up, and I'd pick so many other guys to win this race. Yes, I know he's in a Joe Gibbs car now, but again, guys, equipment, not big of a deal here, and place differential is king. I'd rather play McDowell, Bubba Wallace, Cole Custer, Briscoe, Reddick, Priest over Christopher Bell this week. I won't say that most weeks, but this week for certain. And he wasn't great here last year. Again, it's just about avoiding the wrecks, but he finished 39th and 29th. Got a bit unlucky there, but the 5 super speedway races that Bell has ran in the Cup Series so far, he's got an average finish of 23.6 and a running position of 19.9. So not super confident in Bell here. Very, very minimal exposure on him. Probably no more than 3 to 5% for me. Michael McDowell, $7,200. He won Daytona 500 this season. He's typically a driver that's always been good at these super speedway races. Now, he's better at Daytona than he is at Talladega. Here at Talladega, average finish of 28.5, running position of 26.6. Does have a top 5 finish. That was in the 2019 fall race, but he's been a much better driver at Daytona compared to this track. Like, he's got some bad finishes here. 36th, 40th, and 32nd. Now, once you start mixing in some Daytona numbers, it starts to get a little bit better, where he's got a win, 3 top 5s, 6 top 15s, and 3 top 10s, with 32.6 DraftKings points per race. For whatever reason, though, Talladega hasn't been his best track, but I will still have some interest here. And I feel like him winning the Daytona 500 will boost his ownership a bit as well. Bubba Wallace, $7,000, starting back in 24th. He's a fine plate racer. Now, the problem is he might be a bit too aggressive. We saw that in the 23 car in the Daytona 500. He had a super fast car, but I do worry that he might be a bit overly aggressive, and he could be one of those guys that ends up causing the wreck. But the 23 car is definitely better than what the 43 was. Again, it doesn't really matter too much. Equipment's not a big deal here, but starting back in 24th, I'll probably have a decent chunk of Bubba Wallace because he does have some top 5 potential. Cole Custer, $6,800, dropping down to the 6K range. He's starting all the way back in 27th, and I mean, we can look at the numbers, but starting back in 27th, if he avoids the wrecks, he's going to be a good place differential play, so I have plenty of interest in Cole Custer. Same goes for Chase Briscoe. I realize he sucked this year, but you have to put everything you've seen so far this year out the window because it does not translate to a track like this. Tyler Reddick, he finished 7th in the most recent race at Talladega, so there's some upside here for Reddick. And I remember it was the Daytona Summer Race where he was running really well, actually near the front, but he had that move that took out Kyle Busch, which kind of caused the first big wreck. So that was a bit of a rookie mistake from him, but starting in 20th, again, the price tags are nice, but again, I don't really care about the price tag too much, just mainly where these guys are starting. But Reddick's one of those guys where probably won't be overly popular because starting 20th, it's not really that far in the back, but he's also not starting that far to the front. So he could be one of those guys that gets a bit overlooked here because I think a lot of people play McDowell, Bubba Wallace, Custer, Briscoe, and Preece, and even Buescher because he's just been really good at super speedway races, where Tyler Reddick might get a little overlooked here, so it could be a decent tournament target. Ryan Preece, $6,400, he's starting in 29th. Preece might be one of my favorite plays, and it feels weird saying that about Ryan Preece, but he's good at Dega and super speedways in general, really. But 11.5 average finish, 52.9 DraftKings points per race, which is most of any driver right now. Has a top 5, 2 top 10s, 4 top 20s. Looking at his actual finishes at Dega, there's 10th, 15th, 18th, and 3rd. Expanding this to the past 10 races at these track types, 4 top 10s, 5 top 15s, 6 top 20s, averaging 37.5 DraftKings points per race. So I'm liking Ryan Preece a lot. I think he's an excellent cash game target. Chris Buescher, $6,300. Pretty good at super speedways. Good at Daytona and Talladega. Average finish 15.7 here. 2 top 10s, 3 top 15s. The problem is starting 21st. There's not a whole lot of upside there, but he could be one of those guys that gets a bit overlooked because he doesn't offer you a ton of safety, but he also doesn't offer you a ton of downside either starting in 21st. So I do like Chris Buescher. Plus, he's not a big household name, so I don't think he's going to have a ton of ownership. Daniel Suarez is a very, very similar play to Chris Buescher and Tyler Reddick, in my opinion, so that's really the extent of it. I mean, his starting position doesn't make him super safe, but it's not terrible either. He's just one of those guys you kind of mix and match for tournaments for the most part. Don't have a strong lean either way, just has to avoid the wreck, so cross your fingers and toes that he does not. Ross Chastain, $6,100, starting 18th. He can be a bit of an aggressive driver, so you got to be careful. He can be one of those guys that does trigger the big one. Also in good equipment now, because back in the day, he was an absolute junk equipment, kind of rode around the back and picked up as a good finish, which you would take every single time because he'd start in the 30s. He had an average finish of 21.8. You would take that every single time. Very safe play. Now, starting 18th in good equipment, a bit of a risky play here, but there's some top 10 upside. But again, kind of a similar play to Suarez, Buescher, and Tyler Reddick, all starting in that same starting position range. Then dropping down to the 5K range, we start to get into our punt place differential plays, and you can certainly load up your lineups with these guys. Now, the problem is if there's no big one, like we've seen, like even last year in last year's race, I believe it was in the spring, summer race, whatever you want to call it, the big one didn't happen until the last lap. So these guys weren't great plays because we need that to happen before the last lap so they can pass those guys. Unfortunately, that did not happen. So if you roster these guys in the back, like the bad cars, the guys in the back that have decent, halfway decent cars, they can still move their way up. But these guys are kind of relying on big wrecks to happen so they can pay off. Unfortunately, that did not happen. Now, if there's big wrecks, these guys can be phenomenal plays, and that's happened in the past. Like Justin Haley, starting 34th, he's averaging 40.3 DraftKings points per race here. Again, smaller sample size. I think it's only a 2-race sample size. Yeah, 2-race sample size for Justin Haley at Talladega, but he's finished 11th, and the one race he finished in 32nd. If there's wrecks, Justin Haley will be a good play, as will the rest of these guys, so I'm not going to go super in-depth, but if you think this is going to be an absolute wreck fest, then yeah, by all means, play these guys, because they'll be excellent place differential plays, but I don't know, I feel like this race could end up going a little bit more green than we'd like it to be, but if you do think it's going to be wreck fest, roster these guys. I will have ownership to them, just to cover my basis. If it happens to be a little bit more green than we'd like it to be, then those lineups probably won't be that great, but if it happens to be a wreck fest, yes, these guys will be fantastic plays. Not really much separates these guys from the rest. Gralla here, starting 38th. He's a very safe floor play. I feel like he's a very similar play to Harrison Burton, just a lot less expensive. But again, price doesn't really matter too much. Anthony Alfredo, I hate playing Alfredo, but he's viable starting back in 30th for Omer Sports. Typically brings pretty good cars for these super speedway races because these are the races that they have potential to win. Last year we saw John Nemechek run pretty well at the super speedway races, and I will say Anthony Alfredo seems like a pretty big downgrade from John Nemechek, but we saw Michael McDowell win a super speedway already this year. They did him a 500, and if Alfredo can avoid wrecks, he could be a guy that potentially gains around 5, 10, 15 spots, depending on exactly how the race goes. Corey LaJoie, he's been like a super speedway darling for DFS purposes. Now, unfortunately, he's starting in the mid-20s, so it makes him a little bit riskier of a driver to roster because he's usually in the 30s, but he's just one of those guys that knows to hang around back because he's not going to win the race. He just wants a good finish, so he typically hangs around the back, waits for some wrecks, moves up, and picks up his good finish. So I do think he's viable, and I do think he'd be a decent tournament play because people will probably be off of him a little bit because of that 26th position starting spot. After LaJoie, we get into the absolute scrub group here with Yaley, Bilicki, Timmy Hill, Gase, McLeod, Houff, and Ware. You only play these guys if you think there's going to be just a whole bunch of carnage, which there very easily could be. It's kind of hit or miss sometimes at Talladega, but if I had to pick one, I would say Yaley would be my favorite, but it's mainly just whoever starts further in the back, I like them in that order. So maybe besides Timmy Hill, because I have a hard time always trusting Timmy Hill's equipment, but Yaley, Bilicki, Hill, Gase, and they're viable, and you could throw McLeod, Houff, and Ware as well, but I think with that being said, guys, that's going to be it for the video. And if you made it all the way through, please let me know. I always love knowing who makes it all the way through. And if you found this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because 50% of the people that watch this video every single week have not yet subscribed. So if you don't mind helping me out, I do appreciate that. Just a nice free way to show your support to the channel. And if you don't follow me over on social media, you can do that at ChrisPennell16 on Twitter, CPenn16 over on IG. And if you want to help support the channel over on Patreon, link is down below for that, for the optimizer, ownership projections, cheat sheets, data sheets, rankings, Discord community, my GP driver exposures, and all that fun stuff, and many more things. Link is down below, but I think that's kind of it for everything, so I'll stop rambling. Oh, really quick, if you're enjoying the DraftKings contest, please comment your DK username down below, and I'll send you that invite as soon as I can. But yeah, I will stop rambling officially here. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'll see you guys on Sunday for Talladega.